Welcome to the Founder Experience, where we're charting the unpredictable waters of startup ventures. I'm Nathan Williams.
And I'm Alex Gutjahr.
Back in 2018, I remember when I got my first office. It was a real moment, like a watershed moment for me as a founder. It felt like I was moving from a guy working in his garage on an idea into a real company. We got rid of our office back in 2020 when the COVID pandemic hit. And at that point, everyone in the company went their separate ways. We were still working for the company, but my co-founders moved to Portugal in order to be in a better place during the pandemic. And so at that point, we had people all over the map, and we were a fully remote team.
How many people was that back in the day? How big was the team?
Back in the day, I think it was like 6 or 7. And so it was quite a change. And so I've seen both situations with companies. Like for me, an office was almost like a status symbol or a milestone, but then it became sort of a cost that we didn't need anymore. And I guess it opened up the question, do we really need an office anymore? What are the trade-offs? What have you experienced?
So both actually. So I worked for a corporate when I started my kind of career before I ventured on my own path. And that was back in the days where you had to go to the office. And I hated it. I hated going to the office every day. And then at some point embraced working from home, or not necessarily from home, but remote, right? Going to a place where I felt like, okay, I can work here. And that for me often also meant going into a forest and sitting there with a laptop just to work. And I think that's great for various reasons, right? If you're a remote first company, you can hire on a global market. That makes it to some degree easier to find talent, right? As opposed to saying, okay, we are located in Berlin, so we have to hire on the Berlin market or nearby because only this is where we can find people, or we have to find them elsewhere, but they have to move, which is a big burden for new hires, right? So I think that was really good. And one of the downsides that I see with remote work, though, is you don't have that much room for spontaneous discussions, right? Like sometimes, and just to give the current picture, currently I work mostly remote, but I have office days once or twice per week where I see the team. And I think this is a nice mixture because then you still have room where you talk about things that you wouldn't otherwise, right? Because if you work remote, you everything's scheduled to the minute, right? You have the meetings, you jump on a call, you talk, but I find myself talking less about things off topic, so to say. And I feel you can get value even as a company if there are discussions, etc., that are not planned, right? And I find them happening more in a setting where I speak to someone or meet someone or spend time with them beyond just a 30-minute call.
At the end of the day, we're all human. And we still have our human meat brains here that really rely on social and in-person interaction. And it's true. I've noticed that as a fully remote company, there's a lot of trade-offs you make. And the first is that creativity that comes up when people bounce ideas off of each other. Like, just don't have that anymore. I think, like, if I had to diagnose this or to put a word to it, it's almost like you start to run into the problems that big companies run into while you're still a startup. So you run into siloing, like where everyone is sort of working on their own project. And we've tried many ways of solving this. And there are, better and worse ways of doing it. We've tried, a weekly meeting. That doesn't really help that much. We tried, online social events, and they're not the same.
Yeah.
We tried, a month, like a once a month catch up meeting. We tried a once a week catch up meeting. And the problem is that at the end of the day, people in different departments are working on different things. So if they're just giving updates on what they're working on to the other people, the other people will hear them, but it's not necessarily relevant to their work. And so you start running into this lack of cohesion among the team, even though you're still a very small company that is that shouldn't be running into those issues. And the other thing about this fully remote situation is that with it becomes much harder to sort of diagnose where the issues are starting. Now, that said, there's a big trade-off, because most of the time with fully remote work, you're going to be working anyway. And many times you run into the problem of meetings are just time wasters anyway. And could this meeting have been an email? And what I found is that if you hire people who are more predisposed or have a personality that fits to remote work, then that's almost like a precondition for doing this. Like they have to be independent workers that sort of are digital natives that sort of thrive online, and you have to have the right tools for this. That's what we had to do anyway.
And I think one of the key habits that you as a founder have to have is being excellent at communication, right? And then over communicating, because like when you're sitting together, like certain habits or values are getting reinforced just by proximity, right? People surrounding yourself, you see like, okay, this is how we work here. But it's harder when you're isolated. And I think it's much more important to over communicate, because I see this, there are always these bi-directional communications, right? Or one-on-ones. I'm talking to someone, and then I'm talking to someone else, and that other person doesn't have the same context. And then I'm not sure, oh, do we speak about this? And often I have situations where I say something, or discuss a project or something else in the company, and I get the feedback, oh, what is that exactly? And I'm like, didn't I tell you? Right. So I feel like in a remote context, you have to like broadcast more as much as you can, right? Because it's easier to do one-on-one communications. Because when I want something specific from someone in the company, right, I reach out to them directly. But then that's not the same context that everyone else has. So I feel it's much more important to like communicate, what are we doing, why are we doing this, what are new things, and broadcast them to as many people as possible. So even if that may be annoying, right, but rather over communicate than under communicate, because you will lose some people in the process if you're not doing that.
Exactly. And the thing that happens in-person communication is the same thing that happens over video, unless you have like an AI transcript generator, is that you lose information, right? Like at the same time as you've got more organic, creative conversation that can spark new ideas, a lot of it does end up getting lost if you don't have record keeping and a way of managing it. One piece of advice that I was given a number of years ago, when we were starting to lose a lot of information, was not to have multiple Slack channels. Just have like one main Slack channel and then use threads underneath, because otherwise people are not part of the communication. You have to say things 2, 3, 4 times. It's much better to have sort of a company knowledge base that you can operate from. And this is something that's good. I mean, honestly, I think that maybe this is a prime example of the grass is always greener on the other side.
Yeah.
If you don't have an office, you wish you had one. You have an office, you wish you don't. It always depends, doesn't it?
It does. And it's I think you don't necessarily need an office if you go for a hybrid approach, right? I think it's hard, like you shouldn't force specific people to come into the office, right? Because there will always be a penalty to those people if they say, why does X still work from Portugal or wherever they may be located? So I think you can have a flexible approach where you don't have a full office, but you go into a co-working space once per week or whatever makes sense for you in that context. And I think the only other issue that I also saw, which is a bit tricky to navigate, are different time zones. So as long as everyone's like close enough, and it doesn't have to be the same time zone, but you have some core overlaps, right? Where okay, you can communicate, that's fine. But it's getting even more tricky if you work with people from the other side of the globe, right? Where you feel like, okay, now we have just an hour or so to sync up. That makes it a bit harder, especially if you have direct relationships with them on a regular basis. So I would probably avoid that, just because it made it easier. Just for in our example, I'm working with people from Europe.
It's funny thinking of I've got two different stories that tell an opposite lesson, right? So on the one hand, I remember back when I had that first office and how great it felt to have it and to have office parties and to have people in the same place. But at the same time, I remember at one point I needed to get these bright green earphones in order to signal to everyone else not to interrupt me because I was trying to work on something and get it done. And it was almost impossible at that time to get anything done because everyone came to me with different questions like constantly during the day. And there wasn't like sort of a blocked out time. And that was a source of some conflict. The other part of it that was a challenge when we had the office was I would take calls, and I've got a very sort of projecty voice, a very loud voice. And so everyone's trying to get their work done, and I'm on a call going, "Oh, we can't do that." And it's like,
that's hard.
And a little bit disruptive. I also tend to pace a lot when I take phone calls, so I'm walking around the office like yelling in people's ears unintentionally. At the same time, when we moved to fully remote, I found it much easier to get the concentration and the work done that we had to do. I found, first of all, I ended up working more. Everyone ended up working more. Everyone ended up getting a lot more done because we had much more focus time. But the problem was, instead of booking a meeting and then having an hour travel time to the next meeting and an hour travel time to the next meeting, you get 3 meetings done a day. We would take 6, 7, 8 meetings a day. And it would be back to back to back to back to back. And it would be very efficient, but very exhausting, like mentally exhausting. And one of our key team members a few years ago left the company for this reason. They found it just overwhelming. On the one hand, it was just so much work, but on the other hand, it was isolating. Like they didn't have anyone to share the journey with, and they did remotely, but it became rather difficult. And it's funny because this particular person ended up moving to a place where they could have more free time and more work-life balance and to be out in nature more. And that is something that you can do when you're fully remote. I've taken business calls when I'm out in the park. It's wonderful. But the trade-off with that is that you can feel isolated from the rest of the team.
I think not just isolation, and it depends on how people prefer to work, right? That's also important because there are people who say, okay, I want to work with other people to just have some sense of community or just sitting together and working together. And I think what can be or can inflict a lot of pressure on people is if they feel like, okay, how can I display that I'm still working, right? Because the example you gave, just putting on headphones, that works in the office, right? People see it and they'll be fine. Usually people have a problem doing the same when they're working remotely, right? Just saying, okay, I'm signing off Slack for the next 2 hours just to get some work done. And then depending on the culture, people be like, oh, are you really working? And that's like, not even if that's not even, I wouldn't do this as a founder of a company, right? Because you hire people where okay, I can trust them. But it's still a question, what does it do to the people themselves, right? Do they feel like they always have to reply to every Slack message, right? Or where can they draw their personal boundaries? I find this is quite tricky, and it's a multifaceted topic. But I feel this can be a lot of pressure for some employees to work in that mode.
Absolutely. I think that there's no right answer to this particular question. Do I need an office? Should we be remote? But it almost feels like, did you ever used to play those video games where if you choose one character or one class or something, it has a very specific drawback that there's no one that's better than the other.
Yes, should be balanced.
You have to play through the strengths. This is that situation.
That's
right?
true.
Like you have to look at what is my preferred work style. And if we're going remote, there's going to be drawbacks. And it might not even be that you have to plan to shore up and make it against those drawbacks so much as you have to make sure that you're playing into those strengths. What does being fully remote mean for your company? It means that you've got a lot more personal freedom. It means that you've got you don't have that travel time. It means that You can take advantage of people in different places, and you really need to hire in a global context and set your company up to make best advantage of those strengths if you're going to do it. Similarly, if you're going to have an office, it's going to cost you a few €1,000 a month, dollars, whatever. So you better play to those strengths. Make sure that people have good collaborative effort at times. Make sure you make use of that social time. Make sure that the company culture can play off of the strengths of having that place, and that you can invite people to the office, that the office really reflects your environment. It should be really snazzy and feel like you're coming into a place that reflects your work culture.
For sure. But now I can't help but think of my team as Diablo characters. But I guess at the end,
hopefully on the good guy's side.
Yeah, of course.
Hopefully you're not fighting against them and getting
no, never. So I guess as often it depends on your personal preference and what the company needs, and it might also change over time, right? I think usually these kind of strategies or decisions are not carved in stone, right? Because different company size or changes in business model, etc., might warrant a different setup, right? So especially if you're in manufacturing, you can't have people work remotely, most likely. So I guess that's something to always keep in mind.
If I was going to start a new company today, I'm not sure which I would pick, to be honest, because I think that in the early stages of a company, you benefit a lot more from having that in-person daily interaction where you can be creative and come up with ideas to solve the problems that you're trying to solve. It's much more important in those early days when you're only 2 or 3 people. Whereas as you grow, you're going to start to run into these siloing problems whether you have an office or not. Whereas the advantages of no office and fully remote work become much stronger, right? So you don't have to spend that money, but you also are able to hire people from around the world or what have you. So it's really hard to say, and it depends on sort of who you're starting with.
Yes, but I agree to this, especially for the early days. If it's a small founding team, right, 2 to 3 people, it makes much more sense to sit together most of the time to sync. And then also that's kind of the foundation time where you figure out, especially if it's a new setup, where you figure out, okay, how do we want to do this? How do we want to work together? And I would argue you only figure that out when you spend a lot of time together. And that by the way, again, doesn't have to be in an office, but spending time together to just establish, okay, this is the way we want to do this in this business. And then once that's clear or ingrained, then I think it's easier to just go the remote path from there.
Yeah. At the same time, like this is a very software specific problem, right? Like if you're building a physical product and you have a warehouse, then some people are going to have to be in the warehouse.
Yeah.
But it's not everybody, right? I know a lot of people who work with physical products, but they are in marketing or they're in sales, and so they don't need to meet the team regularly.
But that's tricky. That's like, how do you make sure that the people who have to stand or sit in front of an assembly line or a workbench or whatever don't feel inferior to the people who can then just sit next to the beach and do marketing or something like this? So I feel this may be very. I've never been in that situation, but I can see that this is tricky to argue.
Yeah. Although this can happen anyway, right? Like, I mean, I've worked factory work before and in an office, and the office side team did feel superior to the factory team, both with wages and how their off hours worked. And, you know, like you don't necessarily solve it by having one group be remote. If anything, remote work means that they're out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah. That's it for this episode of The Founder Experience. If you enjoyed it, do us a favor, hit subscribe wherever you are listening, whether that's Spotify, YouTube, or your favorite podcast app. If you've got a second, leave a rating or a review. It really helps. And you can find more episodes and behind-the-scenes stuff on our website, founderexperience.fm. And if you've got feedback or business ideas that you want us to talk about, shoot us a message at hello@founderexperience.fm. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for hanging out, We'll catch you next time.